Why did Boeing's newest jet, built to be safer and more efficient, end up killing 346 people in 2 terrifying crashes just months apart? How could one of the most trusted names in aviation fail so badly? Not once, but twice. Today, we're diving deep into the shocking story of the Boeing 737 MAX. You'll uncover how a hidden software system, a single faulty sensor, and corporate pressure collided to create one of the darkest chapters in aviation history. But that's just the surface. In this video, you'll learn the lesser-known facts, how pilots weren't told the full truth, how the system was quietly slipped into the aircraft, and how warnings were ignored until it was too late. Stay with us till the end to understand exactly what went wrong and why it could happen again. This is Airplane Curious. Subscribe now for more untold stories from the skies. In the early 2010s, Boeing had a problem, and it was flying in from Europe. Airbus had just launched the A320neo, a more fuel-efficient version of its popular jet. Airlines loved it. It saved fuel, cut costs, and didn't require new pilot training. Orders flooded in. Boeing was caught off guard. If they didn't respond fast, they'd lose billions. Building a brand new airplane from scratch would take years and cost a fortune. So Boeing made a choice. They would upgrade the existing 737, a design from the 1960s, and call it the 737 MAX. To match Airbus's fuel savings, Boeing needed larger engines, but the 737 sat low to the ground. The new engines were too big to fit under the wings without touching the runway. So they moved them forward and higher up. It worked. But it changed the plane's behavior in the air. The nose now tended to pitch upward during certain conditions. This wasn't just a minor quirk. It would soon lead to a hidden software fix, one that pilots didn't even know existed. When Boeing decided to upgrade the 737 into the new MAX version, they had one goal in mind: to keep up with Airbus. The A320neo was taking over the market, and Boeing needed a quick answer. Instead of building an entirely new aircraft from scratch, they chose a shortcut: to modify the 737. One of the biggest changes was the engine. The new LEAP 1B engines were larger, more fuel efficient, and much heavier than the older ones. But the 737's design didn't have enough room under the wing to fit them in the usual spot. So Boeing moved the engine slightly forward and higher up on the wing. It worked. The plane could now carry the engines without changing the landing gear. But this change had an unintended side effect. In certain flight conditions, especially during takeoff or steep climbs, the new engine placement caused the aircraft's nose to pitch upward more than usual. That upward motion could put the plane at risk of stalling. Pilots would have to correct it manually, but Boeing had another idea. They needed a fix, a solution that wouldn't require costly simulator training, a fix that could stay hidden even from the pilots flying the plane. To fix the aircraft's new aerodynamic problem, Boeing came up with a software solution. It was called MCAS, short for Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. The issue was this: because the 737 MAX had larger, more powerful engines mounted higher and farther forward on the wings, the plane had a tendency to pitch its nose upward during certain climbs. That created a risk of stalling, something no pilot wants to deal with, especially close to takeoff. Rather than redesign the aircraft or train pilots extensively, Boeing chose a quick fix. MCAS was designed to quietly step in. If the system detected that the nose was climbing too sharply, what's called a high angle of attack, it would automatically push the nose back down by adjusting the horizontal stabilizer. In theory, it would prevent stalls and make the MAX handle like the older 737 models. But here's the twist: pilots weren't even told about MCAS. They left it out of the flight manuals. There was no dedicated simulator training. The idea was to present the MAX as so similar to older 737s that pilots could jump in with minimal retraining. That saved time and money for airlines and helped Boeing sell more planes quickly. Few realized that a completely new piece of software now had the authority to take over flight controls during key moments of flight, all based on data from a single sensor. The Boeing 737 MAX relied on a critical piece of technology called MCAS, a system designed to automatically push the nose down if it started to climb too steeply. But here's the shocking part. MCAS depended on a single angle of attack sensor,
to know when that climb was too steep.
Just one. Not two, not three. Only one tiny vein on the side of the plane. This sensor measures the angle between the wing and the oncoming air. If the angle gets too high, the plane could stall. So MCAS kicks in and pushes the nose down. In theory, that's smart. But what happens if that single sensor gives the wrong reading? It happened. Twice. If that sensor fails, due to a bird strike, mechanical glitch, or just bad luck, MCAS doesn't know. It assumes the plane is climbing dangerously, and it responds aggressively. It forces the nose down and again, even when the plane is flying just fine. And the pilots? They had no idea MCAS was doing it. They were fighting a ghost in the machine without knowing the ghost existed. It was the morning of October 29, 2018. Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta, Indonesia. On board were 189 people. Less than 13 minutes later, the plane plunged into the Java Sea. At first, investigators were puzzled. The weather was fine, the plane was nearly brand new. So what went wrong? As the black box data was recovered, a troubling story began to unfold. Just after takeoff, the aircraft started acting strangely. The nose of the plane kept pushing down, again and again. The pilots pulled it back up, but the system kept fighting them. Over 24 times, the jet tried to dive on its own. Behind it all was a piece of software almost no one knew about, MCAS. It had kicked in, believing the plane was climbing too steeply. But that wasn't true. A small sensor on the outside of the plane, the angle of attack sensor, was feeding MCAS bad information. One tiny part, one wrong reading, one massive disaster. And the pilots? They had never been trained on MCAS. They didn't even know it existed. After the Lion Air crash in October 2018, Boeing found itself under pressure. But instead of issuing a software update to fix the MCAS system, they chose something much simpler and far less effective. They sent out a service bulletin. It basically said, if MCAS activates by mistake, here's how pilots can respond. No code changes, no warnings, no new safeguards, just instructions. Even more troubling, pilots were still not told that MCAS even existed. The system didn't appear in the flight manual, it wasn't part of simulator training. Most pilots flying the MAX had no idea that a piece of software could suddenly take control of the aircraft's nose. Boeing's goal was clear: avoid extra training costs and keep the MAX certified as similar to older 737s. That way, airlines wouldn't have to spend millions retraining crews. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, internal emails showed engineers and test pilots expressing concerns. Some even joked about hiding the truth from regulators, but the company stayed silent publicly. So when Ethiopian Airlines pilots faced the same MCAS failure just 5 months later, they were flying blind, just like the Lion Air crew before them. Just 5 months after the Lion Air tragedy, another nightmare unfolded in the skies. On March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa, bound for Nairobi. The aircraft was a brand new Boeing 737 MAX, only a few months old. It lifted off the runway under clear skies with no signs of trouble, but within just 6 minutes, the plane plunged into the ground at nearly 700 miles per hour. All 157 people on board were killed instantly. What shocked investigators was how eerily similar this crash was to the Lion Air disaster. The same system, MCAS, had been activated, the same sensor error, and the same desperate struggle in the cockpit. Black box data showed that the pilots were fighting for control, pulling up while the plane kept pushing down. Warnings filled the cockpit, alarms blared, the control columns shook violently. The pilots did everything they could, but they had no idea what they were really up against. MCAS had activated over and over, each time forcing the nose lower. And unlike the Lion Air crew, these pilots briefly managed to disable it, but then reactivated the system while trying other recovery steps. It was too late. The impact created a crater 10 meters deep. The wreckage was unrecognizable, and now the death toll across both crashes had reached 346 lives from over 35 countries. Families, journalists, and aviation experts began asking one question:
how was this even possible again?
The second crash changed everything. On March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 went down just 6 minutes after takeoff. It was the second deadly crash involving the 737 MAX in less than 5 months. Another 157 lives lost. The similarities were undeniable. Same model, same strange nosediving behavior, same silence from Boeing on what was really going on. Countries didn't wait this time. Within 48 hours, China grounded all of its 737 MAX aircraft. Europe quickly followed, then Canada, and finally, even as Boeing insisted the plane was safe, the US grounded the MAX on March 13, 2019. The move was historic. It marked the first time in decades that an entire fleet of American passenger planes was pulled from the skies due to safety concerns. Investigations were launched immediately. The FAA, Congress, and aviation authorities worldwide began digging into Boeing's design choices, software, and certification process. Headlines were everywhere. Questions exploded. How did this plane get approved? Who knew what and when? Inside Boeing, pressure mounted. The company CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, faced harsh criticism for downplaying the crashes. In December 2019, he was forced to resign. The FAA halted new certifications, and airlines began canceling orders. Trust was crumbling, fast. And yet, the worst revelations were still to come. After both deadly crashes, the pressure on Boeing was immense. The 737 MAX was grounded worldwide, and investigators zeroed in on one key culprit: the MCAS software. Boeing had no choice but to redesign it from the ground up. Originally, MCAS relied on just one angle of attack sensor. If that single sensor gave faulty readings, the system could force the nose down, again and again, without the pilot knowing what was happening. That flaw had proven fatal, so Boeing made a critical change. The new MCAS would now compare input from 2 sensors, not 1. If they didn't match, MCAS wouldn't activate. They also limited how often the system could trigger. In the old version, it could keep pushing the nose down repeatedly. Now it would activate only once per incident. Just as important, pilots could now override the system manually. Regulators also demanded a new rule: mandatory simulator training. Before, pilots had flown the MAX with minimal instruction, sometimes just an iPad tutorial. Now they had to learn how to respond to MCAS malfunctions in a simulated environment. Boeing's earlier shortcut had backfired, and this time there would be no more skipping steps. Even after 2 deadly crashes and the global grounding, Boeing's troubles didn't end with the redesign of the 737 MAX. Instead, new issues started appearing on the factory floor. In 2023 and 2024, reports surfaced of loose bolts, misaligned bulkheads, and improperly installed door plugs on newly built jets. In one case, a door plug blew off midair during flight, forcing an emergency landing. Investigators later found that key fasteners hadn't been properly secured during production. These weren't software problems, they were physical mechanical failures, something you'd expect to catch in basic quality checks. And that's where the real concern began. The National Transportation Safety Board pointed fingers at Boeing's internal safety culture. But they didn't stop there. They also criticized the FAA for not doing enough oversight. For years, Boeing had been allowed to inspect itself under a system meant to speed up certification. Now, that very system was under scrutiny. And with every new defect, trust in the company and in the planes themselves kept slipping further. When the dust settled, one truth became painfully clear. Boeing put speed and profits ahead of safety. The rush to compete with Airbus led to shortcuts. A new design wasn't chosen. Instead, the old 737 was modified, again. It worked, but just barely. The MCAS software was added quietly. Pilots weren't trained on it. They weren't even told it existed. Why? Because Boeing wanted to avoid extra costs. Simulator training meant delays, more money, and tougher certification. So MCAS was kept in the shadows. And it wasn't just Boeing. Regulators like the FAA trusted the company too much. Instead of verifying everything, they allowed Boeing to approve parts of its own system. That's not oversight, it's delegation gone too far. There's also a lesson in redundancy. MCAS relied on just one sensor. If it failed, which it did, the system acted on bad data. No backup, no cross-check.
Redundancy, pilot training, and clear communication, these aren't optional, they're essential. And ignoring them has deadly consequences.
The story of the 737 MAX is a chilling reminder of what happens when design shortcuts, hidden software, and a single point of failure collide. The results? 2 deadly crashes and 346 lives lost. Since then, MCAS has been redesigned. Pilots now receive proper training. Oversight is tighter, but the damage is done, and the trust must be rebuilt. Still, there's hope. Every mistake, as tragic as it may be, carries a lesson. The skies are safer when those lessons are taken seriously, when profit doesn't silence safety, when pilots are empowered, not left in the dark. So, what surprised you most about the 737 MAX story? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, please give it a like, share it, and subscribe to Airplane Curious for more stories that reveal the truth behind the wings. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.